right. All right, good evening and welcome. My name is Becky Carpentier and
I'm Mike Carpentier. How you doing?
We're volunteers with your local New England POW Alliance, and we'll be moderating tonight's discussion panel. And I want to start with a little housekeeping. This viewing platform you're on right now, it works best on Chrome. So if you want to change your browser, now's a good time to do it. The chat feature is up and running. Please feel free to say hello, say where you're from. It makes these virtual events feel a little less virtual when you guys are talking to us. It's great. So don't be shy. The moderators, we have moderators from our local alliance that are hanging out in the chat, and they'll be answering questions and fielding any questions you have for our panelists tonight for the Q&A section later. So please let us know if you have any questions throughout the event.
So the New England Alliance is fairly new. That's a new program for us, and we're kind of just getting our feet off and running. Our goals here are to engage as many people as possible who love and share our outdoor spaces, and engage those people to go out and vote. If you or anyone you know have any ideas or want to get involved with us, please reach out to Bill Cobb. He's in the chat via the email address. He's going to be sharing it tonight throughout the night. Again, please feel free to engage him. And please feel free to share our events on your social media and call to actions with your friends.
All right. So we're going to split the night up into two different panels, and we're dubbing this the New Hampshire panel and the Maine panel. We'll be taking some questions after the initial discussion. So Bill and some others will be fielding your questions and kind of saving them for later in the event. So because we have some pre-filled out questions for the panelists tonight. And if we have too many questions, don't worry. I think we can get some of these people back for another event. So I'm looking forward to that. There's also going to be some links shared in the chat throughout the event, and our plan is to email all guests who are here watching tonight with any of those links. So don't worry if you aren't paying fully attention to the chat and you miss something and you want to get it, we'll be emailing that out later tonight. So I'm going to start us off with, first up tonight, we have our New Hampshire panel, and that's going to feature Alix, Contesta, and Hilary McCloy. And we're going to get them in here. Alix is a research assistant professor at the Earth Systems Research Center at the University of New Hampshire. And Hilary is a local athlete, former U.S. ski team member, ultra runner, and doctor of physical therapy. So I'd just like to welcome Alix and Hilary.
So we'll have them pop in, open up their cams, and go live. And we'll let them introduce each other or themselves.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey guys, all right, Alix, if you want to lead us off. We lost Alix.
I'll get her back.
Oh, well, we're waiting for Alix. Hilary, if you want to get going, you can get introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I live up in Jackson, New Hampshire, right at the base of the White Mountains. So pretty easy, just run up the road and jump into the mountains for skiing and running. And like Becky said, I'm a physical therapist, so that's my day job, but I enjoy backcountry skiing in the winter and then ultra running and hiking, mountain biking in the summers.
Alix?
I get used to this. So my name is Alix Contesta. As our host said, I am a professor. I work at the Earth Systems Research Center at UNH. I do a lot of research in forest ecosystems. I'm really interested in changing winters, changing seasons, land use change and climate change and how they interact. That's my day job. And outdoors, I love in the winter to ski, mostly Nordic skiing. This summer, I live on the seacoast, so I live just south of UNH in Newmarket, and there's lots of rivers around here, and I've been out on my stand-up paddleboard most days, either in fresh or salt water, staying close to home and really enjoying getting out there.
Nice. All right.
Okay, so we'll get right into it.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with Hilary. So Hilary, how have winters changed since you started in your career or started skiing, and how has it affected your ability to train?
So for skiing, that's the biggest span I think of that I can look at for my sports. I started skiing probably when I could stand up. So just reflecting on this question, I think looking more, not necessarily locally first, but more globally, we used to go train in on some of the glaciers in Austria and Switzerland in September in the fall, and now I've just been keeping in touch, and a lot of those glaciers are shrinking, and I think access to a lot of the training is getting smaller and smaller for ski racing. There's a few places we used to race over in kind of the southern area parts of the mountain ranges in Italy, and one of the resorts was Abetoni, and I'm pretty sure they don't host races anymore. So it's been fun to keep tabs on what's going on in the ski racing world as I've sort of transitioned completely out of it. But we also would always go out to Mount Hood and train, and I think they've had some pretty lean and also really big summers, I think, with that big fluctuation of weather that's coming with the climate change. But more locally, I think, we've had some really good winters, and I've been back east now for 6 years skiing here in the White Mountains. And then we have some really lean, warm winters. And, people argue when it's warm or when we have a really good winter, they're like, this isn't, there's no climate change. We're having an epic winter. But I think those massive fluctuations of weather within the winter and then seasonally definitely has to do with some sort of, global climate change. And so, we see that, some winters are amazing and some aren't, and that has a huge impact on access to, what's going up in the high alpine and then even at ski areas. So, they need cold temps to make snow, and I think in a general trend, things are getting warmer. We'll get those super cold spikes, but I think this kind of crazy fluctuation of weather is what affects us more in the White Mountains in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So that's what I've noticed.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Alix, so outside of shorter winters, what kind of impacts can we expect to see in New England? We've read, a lot of us here have read that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any body of water on the planet right now. Can you explain what that means for both coastal and inland communities for New England?
Sure. So I guess there's a couple parts to that question. So beyond changing winters, there's also been changes in seasonality. So I work mostly in terrestrial ecosystems, but I can talk a little bit about the Gulf of Maine part. But we're seeing that spring is also starting earlier. So we're seeing advances to spring onset. And that actually can make our trees and our forests and insects really vulnerable if there's a late spring frost. You think about this extreme weather and some of the extreme fluctuations that we're seeing. We get lots of warmth followed by extreme cold. And if that happens in the spring, that can lead to mortality of, newly emerged tender vegetation and insects. The early spring onset can also be problematic for animals that are migrating back into our forests. So, birds that are coming from the tropics, if they arrive at the same time, but the spring has started earlier, that can lead to all kinds of mismatches. And that can result in lots of problems. I'm super interested in this time of year that we call the vernal window, which is the time between when the snow melts and when the forest canopy closes. Vernal because it's spring, and window because it's open, right? There's no canopy covering the forest floor. There's no snow on the ground. And this is a time period that's actually getting longer because the snow is melting earlier. Trees are greening up earlier, but those two things aren't happening at the same rate. So we have this longer period where there's no snow and there's no leaves. You could think about it as a longer mud season, but in terms of recreation, it's a longer time when the trails are muddy, where you can't get out and ski and you can't get out and hike. And so that's kind of on the terrestrial side of things. In terms of the Gulf of Maine warming, yeah, it's really alarming. It's warming at a rate that's 99% faster than anywhere else on Earth. And we've seen these ocean heat waves happening where, a lot of the warming in the oceans is happening in the summer. So On land, a lot of the climate change that we're seeing is happening year round, but the biggest warming is happening in the winter. In the ocean, it's different. We're seeing more warming in the summertime, and that can have all kinds of impacts. It can affect the timing of when plankton emerge, and that's the base of the marine food web. And so then you have impacts on all kinds of iconic wildlife in the Gulf of Maine, cod, herring, whales. This can obviously have economic impacts. One thing that's been interesting with the warming ocean has also been that you start to see species shifting their ranges. And so some of the colder water fish are moving further north, and warmer water organisms are moving in. So this has been good for the lobster industry for a while, but it may be that the water is going to get too warm and the lobster is going to have to move further north. All of these impacts don't just affect fisheries and fisheries management, but coastal communities that rely on fisheries, and also on working waterfronts and on travel, on tourism. Another thing that's maybe not obvious is that, as with returning birds, we have fish that migrate from saltwater into freshwater. And so as we see the timing of as we see warming happening, as we see this warming happening at certain times of year, that can also affect fish migration. And those fish move from the ocean. Salmon is a classic example, but they move up into freshwater systems. And so that would be something that goes from the ocean into the inland system. I could talk about a lot of other climate change impacts, but I'm just going to stop there because there are many.
Yeah. I didn't know anything about the vernal window. That's super interesting.
Yeah. And it's so apparent. You can see it up here for sure.
Yeah, I think this kind of actually ties into, Hilary, your next question, which is how climate change is affecting your other endeavors, such as running and biking. And I could see mud season affecting both of those things.
Definitely. Yeah, mud season's always tough. I think as a backcountry skier, we tend to try to hang on going up into the high alpine as long as we can. So I often feel like, for me, it's like a quick, you're skiing, and then all of a sudden it's like summer and you're running. So we stay away from that vernal window a little bit because, not this year necessarily, but other years we're up high, trying to get the last of the snow, as long as we can. But yeah, just with the heat, this summer's been by far, from what I can remember, definitely the most humid and also very hot summer. And so that just impacts just health and safety getting out on the trails. The water, it's been really humid, but we haven't had a lot of rain. So I feel like I always thought humidity was coupled with, thunderstorms and, more intense weather systems, and that hasn't come through our region at all. So it's pretty dry. So if you're going to go do a longer day up in the mountains, you have to really plan your water resources, because usually you could rely on springs that were there last year in August, but this year they might not be there just because it's been drier and definitely a lot warmer. Last summer we had, there was quite a few weeks up in the anytime you're in the high alpine or higher summits, there was a lot of smoke from those fires. Like, we haven't had many local fires in New England, but there were fires coming, I think they were in Ontario, and we were getting a pretty big impact from that blowing over into New England. So that definitely impacted, the ability to breathe. So we're experiencing what we hear about what's happening out west all the time. So yeah, those are the primary impacts, I'd say, on summer recreation out in here in the Whites.
Yeah. All right, Alix. So it's sometimes we can surround ourselves, but really it comes down to, a lot of times we just have people in our lives that have trouble believing in climate change, and it can be uncomfortable in discussing that with them, and like your passion for the outdoors. So do you have any strategies in talking to people and explaining to them what's going on?
Though this is not easy. And I find that more often than not, these are family members, which makes it essentially difficult. So there's a few things that I think can help make this conversation less uncomfortable. and more effective. And I've drawn these from, lots of other places. These aren't my original ideas. But I think one thing is to try to start off a conversation like this. There's this idea, this is Katherine Hayhoe's advice. She's a climate scientist and evangelical Christian, which may seem like they don't belong together, but I think she has a lot of really good advice in this respect. So lead with values, not facts. So I think there's a temptation to lay down all your facts and statistics on the table. And that can be ineffective because sometimes facts are hard to grab onto. And I have this, quote that I keep in my mind a lot. I don't know where it comes from, and I probably am going to get it wrong, but there's this saying the statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. So if you start talking about this many degrees of warming or this many millimeters of precipitation, like that doesn't mean anything, right?
Right.
But I think if you can get at the conversation around shared values, there might be a better entry point. And so, finding common ground can be really useful. Like it's patriotic for us to combat climate change, right? It preserves nature for our children, those might be more effective than we have to get below 1.5 degrees of warming, right? So that's one strategy. Another is to maybe emphasize the benefits or some of what we have to gain by combating climate change instead of the harms. People don't want to be brought down. It's a bummer, and it can be really scary to talk about some of the potential threats. I was thinking about this when I was listening to Joe Biden talk about climate change, and his spin on it was, when I hear climate change, I think jobs, right? So not that I'm, necessarily saying like who anyone should vote for, but I think that's an important message. Like, I think if we can talk about climate change as the potential for innovation, for job creation, for economic development, that's a more powerful message and maybe more motivating than talking about harms. Let's see, another one I think is that the messenger matters. Who is the person, who is this person most likely to listen to? Some of this can be complicated if you don't know your audience, if this is sort of a spontaneous conversation, right? But there was a really interesting paper that came out a couple of years ago by some behavioral psychologists who showed that most Republicans believe that climate change is real and that humans are the cause, but that they don't want to do anything about it because they don't trust Democrats, right? So it's sort of like we're so tribal right now that I think finding an ally that the person that you're trying to bring over will trust may be more compelling, right? So some of this is not possible in a spontaneous conversation, but finding those allies, finding people that maybe have more traction with that community can be really useful. I also think that sometimes maybe this focus on trying to bring climate change deniers over to our side may not be the best use of time, right? Like the action of any one individual isn't sufficient to combat climate change. We need political will, right? So it's really more like, let's try to motivate collective action, and getting your one cranky uncle on board may not be like as effective as like, really like getting out the vote. So not that I don't think we should do it, but I think, we can be so fixated on being right to convince one person when our energy might be more powerfully channeled in a different direction. And I guess just one final thing, that I think about a lot is when I was in graduate school, I did a science communication training with the Allen Alder School for Science Communication. It was awesome. And one of the things that we had to do for this was listen to someone else rant about something that was really bothering them for 5 minutes. And then we had to introduce them without mentioning anything they said in their rant, right? So like listening to the shadow side of a conversation, right? And trying to hear where someone may actually be coming from. So I listened to this person go on and on about how angry she was about her job. And what I heard was, I really care about doing a good job, right? So I think listening to the shadow side of what someone is saying may be useful if none of these other things work. Like a lot of times, a reason why someone might not accept the science of climate change is not because they don't care or because they're like not a good person or they're stupid. There's a shadow side to that. So anyway, those are some tips.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Those are great.
No, that's good feedback for sure.
Yeah.
The value piece, I feel like is that's great because we do, you're always trying to find ways to like prove like the, percentage of glacier melt, and you're right, like that doesn't mean anything to some people. And so finding that like emotional piece is like, it's going to go so much further.
Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to jump into Hilary's next question. As a PT, and you see a variety of athlete injuries, are you seeing anything that's related to climate change in regards to like people skiing when they shouldn't be because there's not enough snow, or maybe running in mud season or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that, again, I feel like I'm keep repeating the same thing, but we get these crazy kind of fluctuations of weather. And on the winter side, at resorts, when you get, we'll get like that, it'll rain and then it'll freeze really fast. So then conditions are really hard to manage on that end. So you're just going to get people not being prepared with their equipment and they'll get injured. But, and then you start to look at more like the backcountry, powder hungry people. And I find when there is like, if we have a week or two of really good snow or like good snowpack, people tend to just go hard because they know that it's probably fleeting before we get maybe the next one, or maybe it won't happen again this year. So I definitely have had some people have some like slightly overuse issues with just, getting excited and taking advantage, or, sadly to say, like, we're not that great at skiing powder. I mean, we are, but we don't get it. We don't experience it enough. And I've had people come in and they're like, they got hurt because they didn't know how to manage heavy POW. So, it takes practice and the right equipment. So yeah, I think that's the biggest impact. And then, just any of the conditions up where it's, slightly more risky, avalanche terrain, you're going to have just this year we had a lot of, it was really firm. So, everyone worries about avalanches, but just like the long sliding falls. And that's like a whole nother conversation. I have a feeling Blake will probably get into a lot of that. But yeah, people get hurt because conditions are changing so fast and it's hard to keep up with that. And then of course, there's snow sharks like we were talking about, you think it's going to be good and it's not good. And, you break a tibia or something.
Mike's good at finding this, so.
Yeah. And then summer-wise, it's not as impactful from what I could think of. More just like more people just not taking care of like themselves with just like the heat, and that's not as much our wheelhouse. But yeah, people are gonna get hurt running through these mountains always. So
Absolutely. Great.
So I think we're going to wrap it up there with you two for now, and we will double back with some of the remaining questions we had in the Q&A. So at this point in time, I want to welcome our main panel. And our main panel is featuring Blake Keogh and Katie Yates. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but Blake is a Portland-based teacher. He's also an area instructor, and he's a ski guide. And Kate,
area is avalanche for anyone who's not a skier.
I'll let him introduce that. And Kate here is the public outreach specialist, and she's from the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. She also runs her own podcast, but I'll again let her introduce that. We'll start off with Blake. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll get rolling.
All right, how's it going, everybody? Thank you for joining this discussion. I really, really appreciate it. I know that Zoom time and screen time is, there's a finite amount that we can all contribute. So yeah, I really appreciate everybody being here tonight. I live in South Portland, here in Maine. I do work for Senate Mountain Guides, and I teach avalanche education courses primarily on the weekends. But I actually recently resigned from teaching. I'm doing the thing that I told myself I would never ever do again, which is go back to grad school. So I am just now going through my phone and watching all of the texts coming through from former or friends who are still teachers telling me about faculty meetings. So any teachers in the audience tonight, good luck, and faculty meetings will be great. And yeah, other than that, when there isn't snow falling, I am here at home working on the garden with my wife and our cat, and hoping that waves will show up in the ocean sooner rather than later so we can go surfing. And that's about it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Katie?
So my name is Katie Yates. I'm originally from upstate New York. I've been in Maine for 2 years, and that's pretty much how long I've been working for the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. My work is primarily focused on recruiting, retaining, and reactivating outdoor participants, in particular hunters and anglers, but it also includes all type of outdoor recreationists. And I do produce and host the department's podcast, Fish and Game Changers. And I used to work for the National Park Service and the National Resource Conservation Service.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll just jump right in. First topics off for Blake. As someone who studies and used to teach, and works on the intricacies of snow science as your guiding job and area instructor job, can you share some of the observations you've seen in New England while you're out there digging pits or just doing basic snow studies, and how it's impacted the way you've been able to teach your area avalanche school students? And maybe you should introduce what area is before you start.
Yeah, absolutely. So ARI is the American Institute of Avalanche Research and Education, and they are essentially our curriculum coordinator, everything from the recreational level to the professional level, the very small but incredibly hardworking team behind the scenes gathers all the information, data, and best information available to put certain programs, certain courses together so that we can all do our best to recreate safely in the backcountry. And there is, like I said, the recreational side, the pro side, the instructor side, forecasting side, and I'm lucky enough to be mainly involved in the instructing side. And I do that because I see it as a way of, when I was first getting into backcountry skiing, I was very, very lucky, not because of my own doing or intellectual prowess, just by dumb luck of having really good mentors around me to keep me from doing dumb stuff. And I see this as a way to kind of pay that forward a little bit. And yeah,
cool.
And be able to ski all the time. So,
So I was just gonna say, so have you seen anything trending throughout winters as you're out there that has changed year to year, or that you can see is astronomically different?
Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, the biggest thing that I've observed that's really a problem are the bookends, right? It's starting later, ending earlier, and the way that area courses work, the ending earlier selfishly just means I have less free time to ski on my own, because usually by that time of the winter, everybody's done with their courses and they're like, whatever, I'm putting all that knowledge to use. So it cuts down on my skiing ability or time. But early in the season, yeah, I mean, I was going through pictures earlier today, where we're essentially trying to teach people how to move through avalanche terrain in a rainstorm. That was one of my first days, was teaching an area course in the rain in a field with Mark Sinnott, which is a whole separate story. But that's not really how that should be. That should be going down. And unfortunately, the trend is such that we will probably have to start those courses later and later and later as our winters begin to shorten.
Yeah, and earlier.
Yeah. And the other piece of that too is kind of, as Hilary alluded to, is the thing that I kind of wonder and think about in my own head is, So if we have this warming ocean, they fuel nor'easters. We have actually larger snowstorms, which is kind of counterintuitive, like hard to grapple with. But some of our storms that come through are producing much more snow than we're accustomed to. Some of those injuries that people aren't skiing powder, right? There's the scarcity piece where people are really excited to get out there. But again, like people don't have the skills to manage, like how often do we see, you know, a storm slab in our forecast? Right, like if Frank, like never. It's like wind slab. Oh, let me guess what's gonna be tomorrow. Wind slab again. So like our bias becomes managing wind slab, and all of a sudden we're gonna have these anomalies where it's like, no, you need the tools to manage a storm slab, or you need the tools to manage a persistent weak layer, and that kind of keeps me up at night a little bit in like the long run of like we're not really practicing those on a daily basis because we don't have those problems yet. But when they arrive, are we equipped to deal with them? I guess is the question. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll go with Katie. Katie, what kind of data tracking are you seeing the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife actively doing that is already seeing the impacts of climate change?
That's kind of, it's a really loaded question because there are so many different studies and things that we're doing. I mean, we have a whole team of species specialists and wildlife biologists and fisheries biologists that dedicate hours and hours and hours of their time to field work and then bringing all of that good data back to a lab and reviewing it. They are constantly monitoring the populations of the species we manage and their habitat and have been doing that for decades. So naturally, over time, we have been seeing how climate changes have impacted them. So this is true for both game species such as deer, bear, moose, turkey, and the non-game species or endangered species like piping plover, New England cottontail, black racer snakes. And we spend lots of time looking at those species and their habitats and kind of analyzing them. And it's interesting because hunters and anglers are our biggest conservationists. They're the biggest contributors to wildlife management and conservation. Their licensed dollars support the studies that we do so we can continue to monitor the health of game, non-game and endangered species and looking at their habitats to see how they are impacted by climate change. But it's, I mean, I could go into them, but I think you're gonna ask me some questions later, maybe about specific species, so I don't wanna give anything away. But yeah, we definitely look at an immense amount of data. I'm not a scientist, but I do work very closely with our biological staff and I learn a lot from them. I go out in the field with them. I do that on the podcast. If you listen to that, you can hear some of the ways. There's no way I could dive into all the amazing ways that they monitor these species, but you can learn more about that on our website at mayfishwildlife.com. And if you call one of our regional offices, our biologists or our game wardens are more than happy to talk to you. So if there's something I mentioned and you want to know more about it, you can always call the department and we're happy to talk to the public.
Cool. And just as a note, I noticed that Bill has shared the link to the podcast as well over in the chat. So if you check that out, again, I think you just finished up with season 4.
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember. We're working on another series now. I don't want to give anything away with that because we're kind of making it a little bit of a surprise. But the last season was all about the Sebago Lake watershed. And the incredible importance of forested watersheds and what that means for the water quality. Forests in a watershed help keep water bodies cool and it keeps the water bodies oxygenated. And those actually can mitigate the effects of climate change. So as we see temperatures rise, we can help keep locally by maintaining habitat. It's also the least expensive way to keep our fish and wildlife species in state healthy is by maintaining habitat. So it's a lot easier to maintain habitat than it is to go back and restructure it. So yeah, so you can learn more about that and how that actually affects the breweries down in Portland, interestingly.
One or two.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so back to Blake. As a teacher, how are you seeing younger generations responding to climate change? Are they aware of it? And how do you talk to them about it?
I'm going to answer that in 1 second. I just want to go back to the first question really quickly, because the one thing I forgot to add was that I actually think our model of risk management in the backcountry is a really good example of the difficulties of dealing with climate change. So we look at a low, moderate, considerable, high, or extreme day. where we have the most problems are the moderate and considerable, because those are the hardest to imagine. So if we take low and we can say that's the normal fluctuation of climate change over time, it's inevitable, it's going to happen, we're never going to be at zero. Great, take it as it is. Moderate, considerable, very confusing. High and extreme would be like, I drive my car, you know, to the grocery store, and South Portland, the temperature in South Portland rises 2 degrees. Like, boom, immediate feedback, right? The mountain's falling down. So we have this exact same problem, and Daniel Kahneman has called it the perfect problem because, so when I was teaching psychology, so this will make sense in a second, but like, we call it perfect problem because there's no emotional salience to it. We can't learn from our experience. We go out, we ski on a moderate day, we feel great. I mean, in New England, we're essentially skiing on wind slab the whole time, which is ridiculous if you think about it. Like, wait a minute, you get to go ski around on a wind slab. That's insane. Right? So climate change is a very similar psychological phenomenon where, because it doesn't have that salience attached to it, because it is such a, you know, slow, hard to pin down evolving problem, it is really, really, really challenging for us to grasp the enormity of the situation until it actually happens, the avalanche occurs, whatever it might be, and then we're in big trouble. So that's the other parallel that I just wanted to create. In terms of kids, and the reason I interrupted this one is because my answer is pretty short. They're way ahead of us. Like,
Really?
honestly, they're like, even across, like, as they're, you know, going into their, or defining their political identity, even the kids who would label themselves as conservative are like, yeah, climate change is happening. They might disagree on the solutions or resolution to that, right? Like what we should do, how we should allocate funds. But there wasn't a single kid that I worked with was like, nah, I don't believe that. Like, if anything, it was us as a faculty trying to keep up with them and being like, hey, should we go to this protest? Should we support them as they're, you know, in this endeavor? And there's actually really good research from the Pew Research Institute. That was too many researchers in one sentence. But there's really good data from the Pew Research Institute about just this, about how across the political spectrum, particularly for this generation coming up, that this is not really a debate. The question is, what do we do now, right?
Awesome. That's actually really uplifting to hear, and sort of heartwarming. As someone who doesn't really have a lot of outreach to the youth, I deal with adult children every day.
It was always tough. They're like, so what are you going to do? I'm like, supporting cow, pick up trash on the March Trail, trying to buy a hybrid.
No pressure.
Appreciate it. So Katie, the monster question's coming. And I'll try to break this up into manageable parts. But basically, as someone who, so climate change is obviously affecting, as you alluded to, the species in Maine and everywhere as a whole. But how do you think that, for our hunters out there, how has climate change affected our moose population? It seems like we're seeing fewer moose in areas that used to be commonly spotted. You talked a little bit earlier about how it's affecting some of the bird population, so if you want to get into that as well. And then I selfishly would love to hear about what you're seeing, the effects on the fisheries, because I myself am a fisherman, and I know Blake's a fisher. I'm sure we've got some other folks on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. Fishing is an easy one to get into. Hunting is a little bit of a tougher sell for some people. I'll just start out with Maine's iconic species is moose. I will say that moose are still abundant in their core range. We have about 60,000 moose in the state of Maine, so they're a very stable population. The major issue that's affecting moose right now is winter tick. So winter tick is not really what you're going to find on your body or when you're hiking or on your dog. They are a single host species, which means they live on one host throughout multiple life cycles, and that typically is moose. So the more winter ticks, because they thrive in these milder winters, the more overwinter calf mortalities we'll see, and we also will see depressed reproduction of cows. So that's kind of the major issue that's affecting moose at the moment. And we also, I think maybe why you're not seeing moose where you would ordinarily see them is because they tend to be moving maybe northward because it's staying cooler longer, and so they're kind of shifting their core range rather than their population suffering in some way. I mean, there's certainly, the winter tick is an issue, but I would say that we do have a very stable moose population at the moment, and we're looking very closely at ways that we can do some things to try and stop those ticks. I can jump into it now, but a lot of people recommend that we release guinea fowl into the the forest, that's not really going to work. Studies have been done to chickens, guinea fowl, turkeys. They'll clean themselves of ticks. They'll clean each other of ticks. They clean their immediate area of ticks. I keep chickens and guinea fowl. They are not bright. They're not making it through the winter. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And they won't really make a huge impact. The other misconception is that turkeys spread ticks. That's not true either. So we are looking at some solutions. Another thing that's not going to work, Brevecto collars or whatever on moose, that's not a realistic solution. Ticks actually adapt to basically what you're giving your dogs, pesticides, when you give them flea and ticks, that medicine. So those ticks will adapt to that, and would just be creating a bigger monster if that were kind of something that we were really considering. Plus, it would be financially not realistic. Obviously, for birds, we're seeing some migration issues. For shorebirds, I'm thinking of piping plovers. As we see rising sea levels, their precious habitat, they're already seeing some difficulties with their preferred habitat, which is sandy beach habitat. We also know that, they might, if they, typically hang out north of Maine, they hang out there longer because there's not ice forming normally where it would, at the time that it would, because we're having longer, warmer falls. And so then they go, oh my God, I'm late to get down south, and they skip over Maine completely. And so they're not hanging out here like they normally would. And that kind of throws everything off balance. We also have seen with some of our songbirds that are normally in a southern range or moving northward. And so it affects our northern boreal species, and that includes boreal chickadee, Lincoln sparrow, evening grosbeak. So some of those songbirds will be pushed out of their range where we would normally see them. So to get into fishing, so I touched on it a little bit. We're seeing warming bodies of water in Maine. It's difficult to say if that's because of climate change. The real immediate issue is deforestation and destruction to riparian buffers. So like I said, forested watersheds make water bodies have cool oxygenated ecosystems, and those are great for our cold water species, which are native to Maine. They're the iconic Maine species, which is landlocked salmon and brook trout, so those are what you're looking for. If the water body is warm because of deforestation or because of climate change or because of both, that water body can, if it raises up even temperature, it becomes less comfortable for those cold water species. And that will create algae blooms. It makes it so that the water's toxic. There's not as much oxygen in the water. And then that makes it even more of a fun place for warm water or invasive species to live. So like bass. And they're a hardier breed of fish. Yeah. And so they will outcompete our cold water species. And so as we see deforestation or as we see water temperatures rising, we'll see our iconic species struggling and see those warm water species like bass doing really well. So I think the takeaway from that is to think about how forested watersheds are really good for the species that we want to keep thriving in Maine. We do a study in Maine. We work with some NGOs and some other partners where we monitor the temperature of streams, so flowing bodies of water, and these measurement tools will take actually a record of the temperature every minute if we want them to. So it's kind of amazing. It's incredibly precise, but we actually have it to go for every 30 minutes or every hour, and then every year or so we download that data, and then we have this immense volume of data, and it's incredibly precise, and it tells us everything that we need to know about maybe risk factors. So if the stream is warming, maybe that's an area that we need to take a closer look at and what's going on there. And is there something happening that we need to dive into further? Yeah, it's a lot.
Thank you. That was an answer, and I really appreciate you diving into each one individually. So as a guide and an athlete, like, how are you able to use, and I guess this is something that us as the average layman can maybe take a little piece of, how are you able to use your platform to talk about climate change?
Well, I'd say one that's ever evolving. I see whatever the platform, whether it's the platform is in person, which is this now, or actually in person, like we're skiing or on the water, or via social media. Yeah, it is finding a way to, first of all, one, what I actually really appreciate about it is check myself first, right? Is like check my data, check my information, my own biases, right? And then move forward with information about climate change, voting, et cetera. And I see it as a fine balance, because I see one part of a platform, we'll just take social media as an example, as a way of just, as honestly, of trying to show other people what they could be doing, right? And for me, like before all this, it was Powder Magazine or TGR movies, and like that was our influence. And like you saw what people were doing, and like, oh my God, maybe I can go do that, right? And by no means am I trying to pretend like on par with those athletes, but I see that as a way of motivating people in very simple terms to get outside. Because I firmly believe that there's no way, and I'm very much borrowing this from a variety of different people, this term or this phrase, but there's no way that we can really go to bat for something if we haven't directly experienced it, if we don't have a relationship with it. So whether it's through fishing, hunting, you know, I don't know, long distance swimming, whatever your thing is, like if you don't have like a tangible relationship with the outdoors, then asking people to vote on behalf of the outdoors, you know, or to solve this giant problem that we're all facing, climate change, is really, really hard. So that's how I see the advocacy piece of the various platforms. And I'll be honest, you know, per the conversation you're having earlier with Hilary and Alix, like then there's also like the hard conversations with friends behind the scenes. Like it's not like those aren't going on, right? It's like, okay, so, you know, you're trying to listen with empathy and see where everybody's coming from and move forward accordingly. So
yeah, and that's one of POW's big messages is action over empathy. You know, it's just it's a big message for us, and we need to not judge. We just need to, you know, kind of give the information that we can. So yeah, good points, and appreciate that.
yeah.
We've got time for one more question for Katie, and I'm tempted not to leave with this question, but I feel like it's important. And you alluded to some of it a little bit earlier, but how, and maybe a couple bullet points, because we probably don't have a huge amount of time to jump right into it now, but how have you seen hunting and the hunting community impacted by climate change?
So it is, it's an interesting question, because when I was doing sort of research for this and collecting information from the different biologists, the one thing that kept coming up as far as something that would impact a hunter is ticks. A lot of people are afraid to get out into the woods in Maine. It doesn't matter if you're hiking or if you're foraging or if you're taking pictures or you're birding or you're hunting or you're scouting for your hunt. People are afraid of ticks. And I think that the thing that I want to encourage people is that you got to get out into the woods. It's great to be outside. It's so good for you to be outside. Having that connection to nature makes you a better conservationist. So knowing how to be safe out in the woods and how to be responsible and respectful in the woods is part of that. So I would just encourage people to be safe out in the woods with your tick safety. So wear a hat with like maybe a neck drape, wear long sleeves, wear long pants, you know, the socks, light colored clothing if you can, and check yourself. Treat your clothes with permethrin if you feel safe doing that, but that doesn't ever replace checking yourself. So just like your hairline and the areas that ticks go in and feel safe. I honestly think that's kind of the major thing that hunters may be feeling, that it is kind of one of those things. But also, if we continue to see issues with climate change affecting the game species that hunters hunt, we obviously will have to make modifications to bag limits, or we would have to close off a species to hunting. And if that opportunity isn't there, if you've been hunting deer your entire life and it's part of your history and you always rely on venison to be on the table and part of your table fare, part of your tradition, if that's taken away from you because climate change affects the deer population or the moose population, the bear population to a point where they're not part of our hunting repertoire, then that could be, you know, detrimental to our culture and our tradition here in Maine. So I think that that's kind of another thing that maybe they're not worried about, but it is something that we definitely think about. And of course, we don't want populations to ever get to that point. So that's why we manage them.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Blake and Katie, again for your piece here. And I think at this point in time, we'll start fielding some questions. And I believe our first question that I see in the chat here is for Alix. So Alix, if you want to hop on here. And the question is, and this is from, do we know who this is from?
Doesn't say it's
Okay. So the question is have you seen a noticeable shift in funding or attention to research in the climate science and potential solutions?
Yes, in two directions. It depends. This is my own experience, which I guess is all I can speak from. So in the era of Trump, so since Trump became president, I've seen the USDA funding change a bit. Not that the funding levels have gone down. So this would be United States Department of Agriculture. More focus on rural economic development, agricultural yields. Those are super important, right? Not down on those. But if there's less of a focus on climate change. There used to be more programs that were focused on climate change or that would have specific program priorities calling out climate change. And now it's about weather variability, right? So, and you know, that's sort of one area where like the funding has gone away from climate change. At the same time, the National Science Foundation has new programs that are aimed at understanding the consequences of climate change. So a newish program at NSF is called Navigating the New Arctic. So what does it mean to have an Arctic that's melting, to have areas that traditionally have not been quite literally navigable by ships now able to be navigated? But then what does it also mean in terms of some of the consequences of climate change for the planet, you know, so carbon cycle feedbacks for indigenous peoples, for wildlife, so this sort of whole new world. NSF also has priorities, funding priorities aimed at developing what they call convergent solutions. So that would be solutions for wicked problems like climate change that take many disciplines all working together to try to come up with really innovative approaches to dealing with really intractable, thorny issues. So in some cases it's going away, in other cases we're seeing more. Really depends.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. So we have a question for everybody, and I guess whichever of you want to jump in, and if there's more than one of you that want to jump in, we can certainly drop ourselves out. But what are some of the key things we can do as outdoor recreators to lessen our impact during recreation? And again, this could be for anyone who wants to answer it. Or no one?
We should also be mindful. I mean, one of POW's missions is, you know, like to get away from the individual action piece, but I know it's important to all of us. Like we all feel a need to do the individual action, but like we need big change, and that's POW's goal. So keep that in mind, but go ahead.
Hilary, you?
Oh, well, my first thought was, I guess, thinking like locally on like that smaller individual level, you know, and, you know, going out and recreating in nature is, you know, we're not impacting that like big scale carbon impact, right? Because we're probably out going on our own steam, you know, maybe we're not traveling all over, but locally, my first gut reaction to that question was, you know, more for local preservation of just like respecting nature and environment and like taking care of it. And that's a hot topic right now, especially in the Valley, because we've had an influx of people who I think aren't used to being on vacation in natural settings, and you know, there's a lot of backlash with locals with just, you know, sort of trashing the trails and everything. So that's a different argument, but it's relevant and it's happening right now. But then it also made me think about too, just what Alix was talking about with how global warming is changing our like how nature is reacting to these shifts in seasons, and if we're aware of that, you know, we can maybe be more respectful for like, you know, when things are more vulnerable, like you don't go out. And so it's a smaller level, it's more local, but how global warming is and the climate change is impacting our natural recreational resources, and is it better for us to not go, you know, beat up trails at certain times of the year because it's like a sensitive season, you know, like I don't even know where that we could go with that, but it's relevant, and I feel like just everything Alix had said was really fascinating with these seasonal shifts, that we don't know how we're impacting ourselves locally by continuing on with you know what we do on a regular basis. So those are my two thoughts with that question.
Thank you.
But like,
yeah, I think just two things I would add are and I don't say this as like you should do this, but like the things that I'm doing are, one is just continue to learn and learn and learn. I think like obviously podcasts continue to be a wonderful resource of information in a lot of ways, but like the outside in episodes on the power line that's being potentially put through various different states, like I was completely ignorant on a wide variety of information that is embedded in that. And so if I'm going to be a good advocate for the environment, I need to also know my information. And so there's a variety of ways, POW being obviously a wonderful way of getting that information. But really, again, like just continuing to educate ourselves on a day-to-day basis. The other piece that I would add is just that the small things do matter in that they're not going to solve, like, and by small things, I mean like picking up trash on the trail, right? Like, is that going to solve the climate change problem? No, not. Even me buying a Prius, is that going to solve? No, it's not. Like, that's not going to do it. But what it will do is it will solidify that identity for me, that I am an environmentalist, that I care about the people who inhabit this place and all the organisms in it. And it will make it much more likely for me to write that letter to a senator, or to make that phone call to, right, or to have that hard conversation. So I do think there is value in those small actions, if for no other reason than it's the small drip of just reaffirming who you are in this place and what your values are. And that can be something as simple as picking up a wrapper on the touch trail and then saying, okay, yeah. Or you set an example for somebody behind you, right? But I do think there is a place for those small actions.
Definitely.
We need to.
I appreciate that, Blake. I think that's great. All right, I have a question for Katie. It's from our friend Lauren, and she wants to know what the best way to get into hunting, and where can she find resources for beginner hunters, so she's comfortable and confident during her first hunt.
Question. Hunting has a really high barrier of entry, so it's pretty difficult to get into if you didn't grow up into, it feels difficult to get into if you weren't from a hunting and fishing or outdoorsy family. But there are so many people out there. It's a movement called adult onset hunters. And actually, in a recent survey that I did of people who took hunter ed in Maine, the number one reason that they were interested in hunting is because they want to connect to nature. So that's the number one reason that they're motivated. The number two reason is because they want to eat wild game, because wild game is really healthy for you. It's really good for you. So I think that if you're interested in getting into hunting, check out our website, mafishwildlife.com. We have a hunting resources page, so you can learn all about the first steps, taking hunter ed, that sort of thing. I would say that finding a mentor is key, so somebody who can walk you through those steps, and someone you feel comfortable with walking you through those steps. There's actually a lot of really great resources and a lot of good influencers out there on Instagram who are kind of showing people the way. We do have a few programs, Becoming an Outdoors Woman. So if you're interested in learning how to do outdoor skills, not just hunting, but also fishing and survival skills, first aid in the woods, identifying different plants in the woods, just being comfortable in the landscape, that's an excellent program. We run a few of those through Bryant Pond, the 4-H Learning Center for University of Maine. And I think that even honestly, just a quick Google search, you will find there are so many people out there who are trying to connect with other adult hunters who are kind of learning this experience and are trying to connect to nature. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is another organization that comes to mind. They are an awesome, awesome organization. They will try to connect you with a mentor. I have met so many wonderful people who are trying to show me the ropes. I've only gone hunting once, so I talk a lot about it. I'm very knowledgeable about it, but I'm still learning myself. But there are really fabulous people out there who are trying to show others how to do this and do it in a way that they feel confident and respectful of the animals and of the ecosystem. So I think that those are maybe some good starting points.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Might hit you up for some links after. All right. So I think we're hitting about the hour mark, so we're gonna wrap it up. First, I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It's something we hope we can do this again in person in the future. So love to have you guys all back. And second, I want to thank everyone that came and is just a viewer and is active in the chat. We really can't spread the word of POW without you guys. And I hope you'll want to get more involved. I know Bill could drop the link about volunteering with POW in the chat. So feel free to get involved with us and share any of our events going forward. We're kind of running on grassroots here, and we're just trying to spread the word to our friends because that's how we do things in the backcountry. And then it wouldn't be a POW event without a call to action. So your homework tonight is to go to makeadamplan.org, and Lindsay is sharing the page there. This is what's going to pop up. This is to make your plan to vote this year. That's our biggest goal as the local New England Alliance. Like, we just want people to vote. That's our biggest goal. It's complicated. We're in a global pandemic. Voting is weird. The news is full of bad things. So like, everything is complicated. POW is making it super easy. You just plug in your information. It's going to tell you how to get your absentee ballot, when to drop it off. They'll give you email reminders. It's fantastic. So make sure you do your call to action. And thank you all for joining us.
And again, that's makeadamplan.org, just as you think it would be spelled. Bill's probably going to share the link to that, and he has it over there. So again, appreciate everybody participating. We appreciate our panelists taking time out of their night. There was some prep that went ahead of this, so we appreciate you being engaged in this and being willing to do this. Thanks again.
Thanks.